There are moments in myth when the quiet hum of fate becomes thunder. A single golden apple tossed among gods would stir a war to shake empires. This is not the tale of a battle. It is the long breath before it. It is the story of choices, of vanity, of oaths unbroken, and destinies quietly gathering their weight. Let us follow the thread back, before swords and ships, to where everything began. Long before the Greek ships darkened the shores of Ilium, there was a celebration in the heavens. A grand wedding had brought together gods and goddesses, heroes and immortals. The union was between Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph of extraordinary beauty and power. Even the gods admired her, and Zeus himself had once desired her. But it was prophesied that her son would be mightier than his father. A warning Zeus wisely heeded. So he gave her hand to a mortal, and all the Olympians gathered in joyous splendor to witness their union. All but one. Eris, the goddess of discord, had not been invited. Spurned and bitter, she did not lash out in rage. Instead, she offered a gift. Into the midst of the celebration, she rolled a golden apple. Upon it were carved the words, "To the fairest." It glittered like temptation itself. Immediately, 3 goddesses laid claim to it. Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, goddess of love. Each believed the apple rightfully hers, and none would yield. The dispute escalated into a divine rivalry, until Zeus, weary of the tension, declared that a mortal should decide. That mortal was Paris, Prince of Troy. He had been raised away from his royal family after a prophecy had warned that he would bring about the downfall of Troy. Left to the shepherds of Mount Ida, he grew into a gentle, handsome youth, unaware of his true lineage. The 3 goddesses came to him not as storm or fire, but as beauty cloaked in clouds. They offered bribes, each more tempting than the last. Hera promised dominion over all lands, a crown of power that would make him the mightiest king. Athena offered victory in war and unmatched wisdom in battle. But Aphrodite promised the most irresistible of all gifts, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite, and so the apple was hers. The other goddesses slighted, turned cold. From that moment, the threads of fate tightened. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, queen of Sparta and wife of King Menelaus. Paris journeyed to Sparta, where he was welcomed as a guest. Helen was unlike any tale he had heard, radiant, graceful, and intelligent. Whether she was enchanted by Aphrodite's promise or moved by Paris himself, she left her husband and sailed with the prince to Troy. Back in Sparta, Menelaus raged. But it was not just his pride that had been wounded. It was a sacred code. The laws of hospitality had been broken, and so had trust between kingdoms. To retrieve Helen, he called upon an oath that had been made years before, an oath sworn by all of Helen's suitors when she first came of age. Before Helen had chosen her husband, she had many admirers, princes, warriors, and kings. Odysseus, ever cunning, had suggested a solution, that all suitors swear to defend the one she chose, to protect their union and punish anyone who would try to steal her away. It was this oath Menelaus now called upon, and those bound by honor answered. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and brother of Menelaus, took command. Odysseus, reluctant at first, tried to feign madness to avoid the war, but was cleverly exposed and joined the cause. Nestor, aged but wise, offered counsel. Diomedes, young and eager, brought valor. And then there was Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus. Achilles was still a boy, hidden by his mother, disguised as a girl among the daughters of King Lycomedes. She knew the war would take him, and she feared the prophecy that he would gain eternal glory but die young. Yet Odysseus found him, tricking him into revealing his identity. Achilles joined the army, radiant and fated, and his presence stirred both hope and dread. The 1,000 ships were gathered. Greece's greatest heroes stood beneath sails and stars, ready to cross the sea. But before they could depart, they faced divine resistance. The winds refused to blow. The goddess Artemis was angered. Agamemnon had killed a sacred stag and boasted of being her equal. As retribution, she demanded a sacrifice, his daughter Iphigenia. Agamemnon wrestled with the gods and his own soul. He chose war. Iphigenia was brought to Aulis, believing she would marry Achilles. Instead, she was offered upon the altar, though some say Artemis whisked her away at the last moment and left behind a deer. Either way, the winds stirred, the sails swelled, the fleet moved. The Greeks arrived at Troy not as invaders in haste, but as storms long in coming. This was no ordinary war. It was a collision of divine wills and mortal pride, of old grudges and fresh betrayals. And behind every shield, a god's whisper. Behind every sword, the weight of fate. The gates of Troy stood tall and proud, unaware that the sands beneath them had begun to shift. The war had not yet begun, but the path had been set. The Greek ships arrived like shadows on the sea, their sails catching the morning light as they stretched in a long, endless line along the coast. Troy had watched the horizon for months, and now the vision had come true. Not as a distant threat, but as reality. The Achaeans, the Greeks, had landed. The Trojans were not unprepared. They were proud, noble, and strong, fortified behind high walls, built, it was said, by Poseidon himself. Their king, Priam, wise and aged, ruled with a calm hand, and beside him stood Queen Hecuba, regal and mournful. Together they watched as their sons took up arms, none brighter than Hector. Hector was the prince of Troy, firstborn son of Priam, and a warrior unmatched. Though he did not crave war, he bore it with grace and honor. His strength came not from anger, but from love. For his city, his family, his people. He fought not for glory, but for peace. And when he stood on the walls of Troy, clad in bronze and shadow, even the wind seemed to pause. Opposite him, on the Greek side, the camp took shape. 1,000 ships meant thousands of men, warriors, archers, sailors, cooks, and kings. Agamemnon's banner flew high, marking his command. Menelaus sharpened his blade, his mind fixed on Helen. Diomedes paced, his youth ablaze with fire. Nestor, grey and wise, offered guidance from the past. And there was Achilles, bronze-skinned and golden-haired, the son of a sea goddess, blessed and doomed. He walked the shore not as a man, but as a figure of prophecy, his silence as heavy as armor. The Myrmidons followed him, loyal and fierce, but even they kept their distance, for Achilles was unlike any other. At first, the war did not rage, it simmered. Small skirmishes lit the edges of the battlefield. Scouts were sent, messengers exchanged, alliances tested. The gods watched from their heights, choosing sides in silence or fury. Hera and Athena, still bitter over Paris's judgment, lent favor to the Greeks. Aphrodite, protector of Paris, favored the Trojans. Zeus, caught between wrath and wisdom, often stayed silent, though his gaze missed nothing. In the early days, Menelaus challenged Paris to single combat. The Prince of Troy, though beautiful and bold, lacked his brother's strength. The duel was brief. Paris faltered beneath Menelaus's sword, and would have died had Aphrodite not intervened. She shrouded him in mist and carried him away, back to the safety of his chamber, where Helen waited. Helen, for whom all this had begun, stood as still as a statue. Her beauty was unmatched, but it was her sorrow that haunted the halls of Troy. She had chosen, or been chosen, and now watched as kingdoms burned for her. Some believed she was a pawn of the gods. Others whispered that she had known what she was doing. But Helen spoke rarely, and never of the past. As the days passed, the fighting grew sharper. Diomedes rose as a fierce warrior, a storm in the shape of a man. Guided by Athena, he cut through Trojan ranks with a blade that shimmered with divine favor. At one moment, it is said, he even wounded Ares, the god of war himself, sending the god crying to Olympus. Odysseus, less wild but no less dangerous, wove strategy through the chaos. He built bridges of thought where others built walls of force. In one daring raid, he and Diomedes crept into the Trojan camp by night, slaying guards, stealing secrets, and sowing confusion. But amid all this, one name remained quiet: Achilles. The greatest warrior had not yet entered the fray. Though his presence alone brought fear, he stood apart, watching, waiting. Agamemnon, proud and imperious, believed victory could come without him. But as the war dragged on, doubt crept in. Meanwhile, inside Troy, the people endured. The city, rich in gold and stories, held its breath. Mothers soothed children with lullabies older than the war. Priests offered sacrifices. Artists carved beauty from stone, as if art could hold back the tide. And Hector, the heart of the city, stood between his people and the darkness beyond the walls. One evening, as the sun bled gold into the sky, Hector returned from battle to find his wife, Andromache, waiting. She held their infant son, Astyanax, in her arms. Their meeting was quiet, heavy with the knowledge that each farewell might be the last. Andromache begged him to stay, to remain within the walls. But Hector, bound by honor and love, could not. He lifted his son and kissed him gently, then placed the child back in his mother's arms. The baby, seeing his father in armor, began to cry. Hector removed his helmet to show the boy his face. His voice was soft, his words careful. He asked only that the gods let his son grow stronger than himself, and that one day he too might protect his home. The war pressed on. Each side claimed victories. Each side bore losses. Names were etched into the sands, unseen by history, but not by memory. The Greeks built walls around their ships, fearing Trojan counterattacks. The Trojans held fast, their spirits rooted in stone and sky. And still, Achilles waited. But war is not patient. It does not tolerate silence for long. It would soon call him, not with trumpet or flame, but with insult and sorrow, tearing apart what peace remained within him. The threads tightened, the gods leaned in, and the war began to change. The war outside raged, but the true storm was building in the heart of the Greek camp. Achilles, unmatched and untouched in battle, had remained in the shadows, an observer to a war that seemed to move around him like waves around a rock. But pride is a delicate fire, and it takes only a breath to spark a blaze. Agamemnon, king of men, grew restless. His authority, once unquestioned, had begun to fray. Though he commanded the host of Greece, he could not command their loyalty without effort. He wanted obedience, and most of all, he wanted to remind all who watched that none stood above him. Not even Achilles. When a priest of Apollo came to ransom his daughter, taken as a prize by Agamemnon, the king refused. He mocked the old man and sent him away, proud and unbending. But the priest was favored by the god of light, and Apollo heard his prayer. Soon, a plague crept through the Greek camp like a whisper. Men fell sick, their strength draining like water through sand. The scent of smoke no longer came from cook fires, but from the pyres of the dead. At last, the seer Calchas spoke. The plague would end only when Agamemnon returned the girl. Furious, Agamemnon relented, but not without cost. To show his dominance, he demanded a prize in return. Briseis, a woman captured by Achilles, and dear to him not only as a symbol of honor, but as someone he cared for. She was not a warrior, nor a prize to be traded. Yet Agamemnon took her, and in that moment, Achilles' silence broke. He did not strike, though he could have ended Agamemnon with a single blow. Instead, he withdrew. From battle, from command, from everything. He returned to his tent, to the sea's edge, and sat. The Myrmidons followed, loyal to their silent prince. But inside Achilles, something twisted. It was not just anger, it was betrayal. He had fought for Greece, led men into danger, spilled blood, and now the very man who needed him most had insulted him before all. Achilles raised his eyes to the sea and called to his mother. Thetis, daughter of the deep, rose from the water. She shimmered with the light of coral and pearl, and her sorrow matched his. Achilles asked her to go to Zeus himself, to ask the king of the gods to tip the scales against the Greeks. If they would insult him, let them taste defeat. And so, the gods shifted once more. Zeus, with a heavy heart, agreed. He sent dreams and signs to the Trojans. He stirred courage in their hearts and doubt in the Greeks. And in the space left by Achilles' absence, Hector rose. The Prince of Troy became more than a hero. He became legend. He led charge after charge, his bronze armor flashing beneath the sun. He drove the Greeks back, past the line of ships, to the very edge of the shore. Fire licked at their sails. The war, once so distant from Troy's gates, now threatened to end before the city had truly suffered. But amid the battle, another figure watched. Patroclus. He had grown alongside Achilles, more brother than friend, though no bond of blood tied them. He shared in Achilles' silence and knew the depth of his rage. Yet Patroclus also saw the suffering of the Greeks, their desperation, the fear that cracked even the bravest hearts. One night, as the camp lay quiet, Patroclus entered Achilles' tent. He knelt not as a warrior, but as a brother. He asked, not for Achilles to return, but for his armor. Let the Trojans believe Achilles had come back. Let fear slow them, even for a moment. Let him lead the Myrmidons, if only once. Achilles resisted. His heart was stone. But Patroclus, gentle and determined, reminded him not of glory, but of duty. The Greeks would fall, his comrades would die. And so, at last, Achilles relented. He gave Patroclus his armor, and with it, he gave him his blessing, and unknowingly, a farewell. Patroclus led the Myrmidons into battle like a flame reborn. The Trojans faltered. For a moment, the tide turned. Hector saw him and believed the storm had returned. They met in the heart of the battle, where spears rang like thunder. But Patroclus was not Achilles. Though he fought bravely, he was not blessed by gods, nor protected by fate. Hector, skilled and fated, struck him down. And when Patroclus fell, the war changed again. The Greeks wept, and in the silence that followed, Achilles heard. They say the sea itself grew still when he learned of Patroclus's death. He did not speak. He did not move. But the sorrow inside him was deeper than any wound, heavier than any sword. He had lost part of himself. Briseis returned to him, no longer a prize, but a ghost of something that had once been soft. She stood near, but could not reach him. Nothing could. Achilles rose, not with pride, but with grief. He would not fight for Agamemnon. He would not fight for glory. He would fight only for Patroclus. The war had become personal. He returned to battle the next day, clad in armor, crafted by Hephaestus himself, bronze that caught fire, a shield that held the world in miniature. Even the gods stepped back. And when Achilles walked the field, the Trojans trembled. Achilles returned to the battlefield as something more than a man. He walked in silence, but his presence roared louder than any war cry. His armor gleamed, not like metal, but like a fallen star. Crafted by the god of fire himself, it bore scenes of the world, oceans swirling, cities blooming, men dancing and dying, all held within a single round shield. The world trembled in his hands. The Trojans saw him from afar, and their courage faltered. They had believed him gone, defeated by pride and insult. But now he stood before them, not for victory, not for honor, but for vengeance. Achilles did not chase glory that day. He chased one name, Hector. The battlefield became a storm. Achilles cut through Trojan ranks like wind through reeds. He moved too fast, struck too hard. No shield could block him, no plea reached him. His grief drove him, and he left no space for mercy. The gods watched in silence. Even they, so often entangled in mortal affairs, did not touch him that day. It was as though fate had drawn a line none dared to cross. Only Apollo, god of healing and light, still whispered to the Trojans, shielding them where he could. But Hector could not hide. He stood upon the walls of Troy, watching the destruction unfold. His city behind him, his family within it. He was its shield, its hope. He had known this day would come. The gods had warned him. Yet still, he stayed. And when Achilles came near, Hector did not run. But even courage bends beneath the weight of doom. In that final moment, Hector turned and fled, not in fear, but in desperate hope that he might find a moment, a space, a chance. Around the walls of Troy, he ran, 3 times, as Achilles chased him like a shadow set aflame. At last, Hector stopped. He turned, not with surrender, but with dignity. They spoke, words carried by the wind. Hector asked for his body to be returned to Troy, should he fall, so that his family might bury him. Achilles, cold and unforgiving, refused. The man who stood before him was not a prince, not a warrior, only the slayer of Patroclus. Their spears flew, their blades clashed, and then, in a moment that echoed through eternity, Hector fell. Achilles did not cheer. He did not cry. He tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged him across the dust, a display of rage the gods themselves found unbearable. From the heights of Olympus, even Zeus looked away. But time, even in myth, does not hold still. The fires of vengeance cannot burn forever. And grief, no matter how deep, begins to erode even stone. Each night, as the camp settled into uneasy rest, Achilles sat beside Patroclus's funeral mound. He ate little, he spoke less. The rage within him no longer roared, it whispered. And then one night, a figure came quietly into the Greek camp. Old, hunched, cloaked in sorrow, Priam, king of Troy, father of Hector. He came alone, slipping past guards, past swords, past hate, and he entered Achilles' tent, not as a king, but as a father. He knelt, kissed the hand that had killed his son, and begged, not for revenge, not for justice, but for his son's body, so he might give him peace. In that tent, something shifted. Achilles looked at the old man before him, and saw not an enemy, but a reflection, a father who had lost a son. And in that moment, the wall Achilles had built around his grief began to crack. He rose and gently, silently, gave Hector back. For 11 days, the war paused. No spears flew, no fires burned. The Greeks and Trojans stood still, honoring the dead. It was not peace, but it was something like it. And then the war resumed. But Achilles would not see its end. His fate, whispered long before he was born, hung over him like a setting star. He had chosen glory over life, and that choice had sharpened the edge of every hour. One day, an arrow, guided not by a mere hand, but by a god, would find the only place he could be wounded, his heel, and when he fell, he joined Patroclus, not in death, but in the place the heroes go. Odysseus would carry his armor. Ajax would rage at the loss. The war would burn brighter still, and Troy would crumble, not under the might of men, but through the cleverness of a wooden horse. But those are tales for another night. Tonight, the winds fall still. The gods withdraw to their shining halls. Troy sleeps under a blanket of stars, quiet for now, and the echo of Achilles, his rage, his love, his loss, settles into legend. Even the brightest flame flickers, but in myth, it never truly fades.